Our News is brought to you by Alive.
Tonight on Our News, $800,000 spent weekly on food assistance. COVID cases are down, but the situation remains grim. And remembering the 6 victims of a 2013 fire. Welcome to Our News and thanks for joining us. I'm Christina Dragovich. Topping news tonight, with the National Food Distribution Task Force set to wind down next week, Social Services Minister Obi Wilchcombe says a total revamp of the food program is needed. For starters, he says too much money is being spent. Kyle Joaquin has more.
I just don't understand why we're spending $800,000+ a week. I have a difficulty with that.
The Social Services Minister says with $800,000 being spent per week on food assistance, he feels it should go a much longer way.
Why are we spending an incredible amount of money going through second and third parties when it's costing the state so much and still not getting as many people the food as I'd like them to have? 17,000 we're told were fed. My thinking is you have much more than that.
Wilchcombe says with the Food Distribution Task Force wrapping up its work, government will introduce a new program as soon as possible. Another program he says his ministry is looking to implement, one that provides housing for the homeless.
Why don't we go look for places that are sitting idle right now? Someone mentioned perhaps, say, the Corner Motel that's on Carmichael Road, that if it's available, why can't we go? And why can't we cause people to have at least a place to stay?
Now, as for where government would get the money to fund such a program,
money is around, and we have to find ways in which we have to cut certain areas to do certain things.
Now, one thing the minister said he really wants to get rid of is the need to have people standing outside waiting for assistance.
One of the things I'm deeply concerned about is to see the Bahamian people, many elderly, sitting on the outside waiting for services. That's not appropriate. That's unacceptable.
State Minister for Social Services Lisa Ramming is hoping to revitalize urban renewal and get social services offices in more communities.
So if you have an issue in the community that you live, you wouldn't have to come out on the outskirts and stand on long lines and sit in the sun. You're going to get that help right there.
For Our News, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
Well, COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations have decreased slightly, but former Health Minister Dr. Dwayne Sands says patients remain extremely ill and require significant medical intervention. This as health officials confirmed 8 more COVID deaths between September 2nd and 23rd. Jared Higgs reports.
Though there were nearly 1,000 less confirmed cases in September when compared to August, and 25% less people hospitalized compared to 3 weeks ago, former Health Minister Dr. Dwayne Sands says there are still very, very sick patients in the nation's hospitals.
While we are gratified that there are not 200 people hospitalized, or 180, the fact that we are still at 140, the system remains overwhelmed.
In the lead up to the general election, which took place nearly 2 weeks ago, there were concerns expressed about crowds at drive-in rallies, on nomination day, and at the polls.
We have seen a significant number of people that have died this week.
While confirmed cases have decreased, positivity rates remained high, with a 19% rate recorded on Monday, well above the WHO's recommended maximum rate of 5%.
If you look at the numbers for September, and September is not yet done, we are going to eclipse the number of deaths seen in August.
Questions remain, though, over what impact the shift to a midnight curfew will have on the COVID-19 situation. Many residents and business owners have expressed support for the change, while some critics say it could lead to an increase in cases if individuals don't follow safety protocols as they enjoy their new freedom. Sands says we will have to see what the impact will be, but he doesn't want to nitpick on the decisions of the new administration.
While it is reasonable and appropriate to criticize where criticism is due, it is also reasonable and appropriate to give some time to allow those individuals to get the lay of the land.
Sands says vaccine uptake has no doubt saved lives and kept many more people out of hospital. However, he says the current 23% vaccination rate is far off the 70 to 80% needed for full protection of the population. The reality, he says, is that COVID-19 remains a major concern for public and private healthcare institutions in the country. going as far as to claim that the country's per capita death rate is the highest in the world.
Say what you like about the number of cases, say what you like about the management of COVID. What is clear is that the Bahamas has more deaths per capita from COVID than virtually every other country in the world.
Reporting for Our News, I am Jared Higgs.
Meanwhile, the Bahamas Christian Council is pleading with the Davis administration to ease church restrictions. It comes after officials shortened the nightly curfew and eliminated travel health visas for domestic travel. Bethany McDermott reports.
The Christian Council is petitioning government to ease restrictions on churches enforced by the former administration. PCC President Delton Fernandez says there are a few points in the order that are challenging for churches. As a result, he said some of the guidelines were fully ignored.
Now, two guidelines the church has totally ignored. That's the 1 hour, because before election we had those things settled. The order was never changed. And as it relates to funerals and memorials, as you look in the paper today, there are many that are going to happen this week in churches. And this is why we need to sit and change some of the orders.
In July, churches on New Providence and Grand Bahama were limited to 1 hour services with a maximum capacity of 33%. Additionally, funeral services were restricted to graveside only, with a maximum of 30 people, excluding the officiant and funeral workers.
The graveside funerals are really challenging, especially when we can have ceremonies for 3 and 4 hours in hotels, in churches, the like, on a Sunday morning, and worship being limited to 1 hour. With our social protocols that are used all around the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for different functions on the state level.
Now, the Christian Council president also addressing concerns that funerals, weddings, and church services could be super spreader events. It's a claim he quickly shot down.
So can the national events. And so if you're going to say church service can cause COVID, so should the national events. We can't be hypocritical.
In August, the Nassau Guardian reported that multiple Church of God members either died or were hospitalized after allegedly contracting COVID-19 from a youth convention. Fernando told the Tribune newspaper church officials didn't believe the event was to blame. As for the council's request for a meeting, Fernandez said it was submitted last week and he's hoping to meet with officials soon.
We expect, as we sit with this new government, that we can hash out the changing of some of the orders.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Bethany McDermott.
Shifting gears, 8 years after a fire ripped through a 4-bedroom home, killing 6 people, including a toddler and her mother, family members are still seeking closure. Jared Higgs has the story.
A little over 8 years ago, Madeline Besant experienced the worst tragedy of her life.
My best friend called me. She lived right next door, and she told me the house was on fire.
That was Besant at 19 on the day that her 22-year-old sister, Jennifer Besant, 2-year-old niece Joashini King, her aunt 53-year-old Marilyn Palmer, and 3 cousins, 23-year-old Eunice Pratt, 17-year-old Trayvon Grant, and 15-year-old Melchizedek Bain, died in a house fire on Homestead Avenue.
When I reached on the scene, all I wanted to do was go in the house and die with my sister. That's how I felt.
According to police, the fire erupted before 2 a.m. on September 23, 2013. Just hours earlier, Besant says she and her family enjoyed a day of family and cooking. She lived in the home at the time, but luckily for her, she was out that night. She says the loss of her older sister, who dreamed of being an accountant, was especially hard.
She was my protector. She was just everything for me, because she was basically all I really had. So she was a very decent person. She would cook and feed whoever needed it.
Our News interviewed Besant at the site of the fire, her first visit in years. The structure is no longer there, but the memories of that horrible night are vivid in the now 28-year-old's mind. A recent fire on Cocoa Plum Road off East Street that claimed the lives of 3 people, including 2 children, brought those memories back.
I relived the entire 2023 tragedy all over again, and I sympathize with that family because I know firsthand how it feels.
Besant, now a mother of a 4-year-old girl herself, never found out how the fire started. At the time, police said the 6 victims were found huddled in a room together. Autopsy reports revealed that the causes of death were asphyxiation due to smoke inhalation. All 6 victims were funeralized together, and only her 2-year-old niece wasn't cremated.
It was hard. I barely could walk in the church. It's very rare that you hear a family have to bury like 6 people one time.
Reporting for Our News, I'm Jared Higgs.
Thanks, Jared. Well, mostly sunny skies in the capital today. Greg Thompson is in the Weather Center with the latest.
Thanks, Christine, and welcome everybody for your first look at weather. Beautiful conditions on the outdoors. Temperatures very comfortable in the low to mid 80s. 83 degrees outside the studios with just a few clouds. We'll call it mild. The winds are out of the northeast at 6 knots, and your feels-like temperature, factoring in the dew point, it feels like the mid 80s. Satellite view, quiet across the islands. High pressure remaining in charge as that frontal boundary that dumped some showers across us has fallen apart. We will continue to see 1 or 2 spotty showers tonight through tomorrow. That's your first look at weather. Your extended forecast is still to come.
Still to come on our news, healthcare professionals bracing for a possible election spike, and why the BUT president won't be working with the new state minister for education. Stay with us.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. Topping news tonight.
COVID-19 remains a serious threat.
Coronavirus COVID-19 has disrupted our economy, tourism industry, educational system, and put our healthcare facilities and professionals on high alert. Are you prepared? Do you have all the facts? Stay tuned to this network for the very latest news and information on this global pandemic.
Though COVID-19 cases appear to be trending downward, the CPSA president says healthcare professionals are still bracing for a possible spike following the general election. Jillian Gray has that.
While case numbers and hospitalizations are down, healthcare providers are not breathing easy just yet. CPSA President Dr. Sabrika Pinder-Butler says there are many variables to consider when analyzing the dashboard, and people still need to be careful.
Elections occurred, and we know that from historical data, we know the timeline could be up to 2 weeks and even more when we see further surges. So we're, as healthcare providers, we're still bracing for that. We're hopeful that things will not go in that direction. But certainly we know that it's a potential.
August saw the most case numbers and hospitalizations since the start of the pandemic. However, September shows a decline from triple digits recorded daily. Dr. Pinder-Butler questioned whether people are still using the PCR test instead of the rapid antigen test, which is not counted on the dashboard.
Are we having that 70 or 80% who are having mild disease? Or because we've been talking about COVID so much, we know the symptoms. Persons anecdotally know how to treat themselves, so they're not coming in. So unfortunately, are we only seeing persons who are coming in extremely ill?
Despite the removal of testing 5 days after travel for Bahamians, Dr. Pinder-Butler urged travelers to still get tested.
We would still hope that as citizens, we would still want to know our status. And even if those things have been suspended, that we seek to ensure that we're still safe once we've re-entered the country, as well as our family members and others in the community. I think that's absolutely critical.
The government extended the curfew from 9 p.m. to 11:59 p.m., but that's no excuse to throw caution to the wind, according to Dr. Pinder-Butler.
If we're not disciplined, we're going to end up in trouble.
Now, Dr. Pinder-Butler says regardless of what the restrictions are, it's up to every Bahamian to get vaccinated for COVID-19 and adhere to best practices. Reporting for our news, I'm Jillian Gray.
In other news, the Ministry of Education now has a substantive minister and a minister of state. However, the Teachers Union president says she's only interested in working with one of them. Kyle Joaquin explains.
The Bahamas Union of Teachers and the Minister of State has zero relationship.
And that's as frank and plain as it'll get, according to BUT President Belinda Wilson. For years, the union has been at odds with the Ministry of Education over numerous issues. However, with a new government and new substantive minister Glenys Hannah-Martin at the helm, Wilson says there will be cooperation as the two sides have already had a brief meeting.
I am going to deal directly with the Minister of Education, who is the substantive minister. Now, I see a Minister of State as an internal assistant to the substantive minister. So the Minister of Education, the Honorable Glenys Hannah-Martin, the Bahamas Union of Teachers, we're looking forward to her setting the tone.
But when it comes to State Minister of Education Zane Lightbourne, that's not the case. You may recall a few years back, Wilson was suspended as BUT president and Lightbourne became president. Wilson eventually won her court case and got the presidency back. Years later, there is still bad blood between the union's executives and now someone they will have to work with.
In fact, there are some legal matters between the Bahamas Union of Teachers and the Minister of State, which I will not ventilate publicly. So that is definitely going to be a challenge and an obstacle.
Well, we also spoke with Hannah Martin and Lightbourne.
I think we are committed to finding the common ground in the interests of the advancement of education in this country. I'm going to do my part to work as best I can, and I'm committed to it.
And in any case, the hindrances that would have come before us, we put that all behind us. If that was a factor that anyone had doubt about being carried on, we're here because it's a new day for us to make a difference.
Wilson says while she is working in good faith with the ministry, in particular Hannah Martin, for the betterment of education in the country, she says the union's priority is still the fair treatment of teachers.
If you come for the teachers, if you come for the Bahamas Union of Teachers, we will not back down.
For Our News, I'm Kyle Joaquin.
From the courts, 2 men, ages 20 and 18, were arraigned today on murder and attempted murder charges. Jawan Ambrister in the red jacket and Dimitri Thurston were charged with the September 18th murder of Devante Brown and the attempted murder of Vadley Butler, as well as possession of a handgun and a firearm with intent to endanger life. They were not required to enter a plea and were remanded to prison. They will return to court on December 15th. Meanwhile, the private sector and not-for-profit organizations play a critical role in managing the COVID-19 pandemic and preparing for the next crisis, according to PAHO Director Dr. Carissa Etienne, who used the Bahamas as an example of how this sector helped to provide access for vulnerable communities.
For example, in the Bahamas, a private-public partnership contributed to increased bed capacity for COVID-19 patients. It adapted and redefined a model of care to respond to the evolution of the pandemic, protecting communities of the Family Islands, including transfer of patients and provision of necessary supplies.
She says the private sector helps to lead innovation and managing platforms necessary to generate and manage critical information, as well as develop medicines and technology. However, Dr. Etienne says beyond the pandemic, a greater investment has to be made in primary care, where about 70% of patient needs can be solved.
Mainly hospital-centric, instead of being people and community-centered. They are focused on resource generation instead of health outcomes, on illness and disease instead of the holistic health and well-being of the individuals. This obviously has to change.
PAHO has encouraged self-sufficiency in the region to address access and supply issues highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Etienne says the groundwork has been laid.
Investments in science, technology, and the industrial base in developing countries are essential for the future. And PAHO is working with member states on all of the above, ensuring that we can successfully confront this pandemic and bring it to an end, but at the same time, begin preparation for the future.
When Our News returns, the singing bishop's prayers are answered and the sun gets burned. The details when Our News returns.
Welcome to Our News and thanks for joining us. Topping news tonight.
COVID-19 remains a serious threat.
Coronavirus COVID-19 has disrupted our economy, tourism industry, educational system, and put our healthcare facilities and professionals on high alert. Are you prepared? Do you have all the facts? Stay tuned to this network for the very latest news and information on this global pandemic.
This is Our News. Welcome back. Nonprofits that cater to those in need are being pushed to the brink, according to Prophet Lawrence Roll, whose feeding program faced a serious setback when the power supply was disconnected. Jasmine Brown has that.
The show did go on here at the Bishop's Feeding Center due to a simple act of kindness from corporate citizens, politicians, and everyday Bahamians.
A little bit more fire. Rice.
What's that?
This is chicken.
The spread of food was a far cry from Tuesday when the charismatic religious leader wondered whether he would be able to adequately feed the hundreds of underprivileged Bahamians who depend on him for food every Wednesday. Roll was pleading for help after all the meat he had stored in 3 separate freezers spoiled due to the electricity supply being shut off. The singing bishop said he prayed that help would come.
You all meet people out there, right? You see what time it is? For the people that will be out there today, and God know me, one can't feed them. I hear some people saying, tithes and offering, let the tithes and offering. Tithes and offering? Well, Lord of mercy. Where you can find that?
When we visited Roll's operation this afternoon, people were already outside waiting on their plates of food.
We don't know the condition in this country. And I can say this, and yet still some of you, a politician, could build 3-story house. Well, I know you're not going with that. Yet still some of you could build 3-story house. I walked the street and I could never believe the dirt on some young mother's floor. I don't know where the husband is or the boy, however. All I know, when I see them little children, I was like, what?
Roll said after 30 years, the work that it takes to run the ministry is taking a toll on his body.
Right now I feel like a knife going in here and a knife going in here. And the doctor can tell me, you're dancing too much and you're working too hard. Doctor, for music kick off in here right now, you got to move your needles on the side because I'll start one number right here.
Reporting for our news, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Thanks, Jasmine. Jonquil Jones and the Sun suffer a double overtime loss to start their playoff run. Marcellus Hall has more tonight in sports.
All right, thanks a lot. Welcome to our sports, everybody. I'm Marcellus Hall. Every win streak comes to an end at some time. Last night was probably the wrong time if you're a member of the Connecticut Sun. That's because they had their 14-game win streak snapped when they took on the Chicago Sky, Game 1 of the best-of-5 series. Fresh off of her near-unanimous winning of the WNBA's MVP award, Jonquil Jones leading the Connecticut Sun into action last night against the Chicago Sky, Game 1 of their semifinal series, best-of-5. This one, boy, I tell you what, would be a pretty good game. Back and forth they would go, ending regulation tied, and they head to overtime. Second overtime period needed to decide this one, and it would finally go the way of the Chicago Sky. They pull off the upset here, 109-95, stealing Game 1 of the best-of-5 series. As we mentioned, Courtney Vandersloot, boy, she was amazing in this game for the winning Sky team. She had 12 points, 10 rebounds, 18 assists. That turns out to be a league record as far as the playoffs are concerned. She also added 4 steals and 2 blocks. As for Jonquil Jones, she had a pretty good night. 26 points on the evening, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 2 blocks, but it would not be enough. They find themselves on the trail end of the series now. Game 2, if you're wondering, comes your way on Thursday as the Sun try to turn things around and reassert themselves. Remember, they are the #1 seed. All right, so at least if you're going to have a loss, let it be at the beginning of a series rather than the end. Things still pretty bright for Jonquil Jones. They're going to come back on Thursday. We'll see how that one turns out. That's your check on sports. I'm Marcellus Hall. Back to you.
Thanks, Marcellus. Still ahead, how Family Guardian is helping cancer patients. Stay with us.
Welcome to our news and thanks for joining us. Topping news tonight.
COVID-19 remains a serious threat.
Coronavirus COVID-19 has disrupted our economy, tourism industry, educational system, and put our healthcare facilities and professionals on high alert. Are you prepared? Do you have all the facts? Stay tuned to this network for the very latest news and information on this global pandemic.
Welcome back to our news. Tropical Depression 20 churning in the Atlantic. Greg is back in the Weather Center with the extended outlook.
Thanks again, Christine. Welcome back, everybody, for your second look at weather. Still tracking the tropics with 4 systems out there. Newly formed Tropical Depression 20 just south of the Cape Verde Islands, moving towards the northwest with 35-mile-per-hour winds. Continuing in that direction, it should stay in the Atlantic as a fish storm. System out ahead of that, the National Hurricane Center giving that a 10% chance. And Peter in the North Atlantic will continue to move away. But we are continuing to watch Sam, which is a very powerful hurricane, moving east of the Leeward Islands. Swells will continue to affect the islands beginning tomorrow and into the weekend, so beaching and boating will be a problem, and that system will stay well east of the islands. Speaking of beaching and boating forecasts, for all areas tonight through tomorrow, we expect your winds to be out of the northeast to east at 10 to 15 knots. Seas running 2 to 4 feet over the ocean. Low tide will be at 9:21 tonight. Here's a look now at your national forecast. Look now at your extended forecast through Monday. That's a look at our weather. Make it a safe evening, everyone. Christina?
Thanks, Greg. Well, Family Guardian Insurance donating 100 care packages to the Cancer Society of the Bahamas. Director Laverne Wildgoose was grateful for the kind gesture.
The care packages will be presented for the patients of the Cancer Society. We have 10 rooms here where we house patients coming in from the Family Islands to do their treatments. And they stay here as long as they have to. And it's a home away from home for them. Sometimes the patient don't have anywhere to stay, and so they stay here at the Cancer Society. And so these care packages, beautiful care packages here this morning, will be really appreciated by special guests coming in.
District Manager Tamika Pyfrom says they felt compelled to assist those in need.
In our care packages, we have a twin bed sheet set, 3-piece towel set, a soap, lotion, toothpaste, travel size Listerine, and we have a case of 12-ounce water. So they're well equipped and prepared for their love that they'll receive in their room.
Well, thank you for joining us for our news tonight. On behalf of the entire team, I'm Christina Dragovich. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night. Have a beautiful evening, Bahamas.